Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're about to take a dive into something that might make you question what you think you know about family, respect, and power. I promise you, this won't be your typical family dinner story. Imagine going to a celebration, a special moment for your family, only to find yourself humiliated and thrown out by the very people you love. Can you even imagine that happening? Maybe you've had a taste of it. Or maybe this is all just too shocking to grasp.
But before we dive in, if you're curious about how this all unfolds, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you actually like what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from. So drop your location in the comments and let's see how far this story goes.
Now let's get comfortable. Grab a drink if you need to dim the lights, and let's begin this journey tonight.
I should have known something was wrong when I rang the doorbell. It wasn't the warm greeting I expected. Normally, my son David would be the first to answer the door, greeting me with that familiar smile I hadn't seen in a while. But this time it was Lydia, my daughter-in-law, who opened the door. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the handle almost as if she thought the house was her territory. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice carrying a tone that immediately made me feel like an unwelcome guest, even though it was my son's home and I had been invited for dinner. "Hello, Lydia," I said, with a forced smile, clutching the gift bag I had brought for Tommy. Inside was a hand-knitted sweater I'd spent weeks working on. It wasn't much, but I thought he'd love it. It was for his birthday after all. I had hoped this dinner would be a chance to reconnect with my son and spend some time with my grandson. But Lydia didn't move aside to let me in. Instead, she looked me up and down like I was some sort of inconvenience. "Marcus is still getting ready," she said. "The other guests are already here." Guests. I hadn't been told there would be others. A small family dinner was what I was led to believe. I tried to push aside the feeling of being a second-class citizen as she ushered me inside. The living room was far more lavish than I expected. It was filled with couples dressed in designer clothes, their jewelry sparkling under the light from a crystal chandelier. Their conversations were hushed, important, and filled with words I didn't recognize. I had no clue what they were talking about. I recognized a few faces from society pages, but no one seemed to care to know who I was. And then I heard it, the sweet sound of Tommy's voice. "Grandma." He ran toward me, his little arms outstretched. In that moment, everything seemed right again. This was my family. This was why I came. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered as I bent down to hug him. He smelled like cake sugar and childhood innocence. I could hardly wait to give him the gift I'd brought. But before I could hand it over, Lydia's hand was on Tommy's shoulder, pulling him away from me. "Tommy, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. Why don't you go play with your cousins?" Lydia said, her voice cold. The message was clear. I wasn't clean enough to touch her son. Dinner was worse. The long table seemed endless. It was set with china I'd never seen before, likely wedding gifts from Lydia's side of the family. I was seated at the far end, wedged between an empty chair and Marcus's college friend, who spent the whole meal talking loudly about his latest business acquisition. Marcus glanced at me once during the appetizer. He smiled weakly, but the moment Lydia whispered something in his ear, he turned away. That was it, the only time he acknowledged me during the entire evening. I tried to keep my composure, but my stomach churned as I ate, my focus drifting to the awkwardness of the situation. How had things changed so much? Had we really grown so far apart? Then the conversation shifted. Lydia's voice rang out across the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So, Sherry," she began, her voice dripping with disdain, "Marcus tells me you're still working at that little cleaning company." The word "little" felt like a slap across my face. Several people around the table looked at me, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. "Yes, I own a business," I said quietly, trying to avoid making a scene. Lydia let out a mocking laugh. Oh, how sweet. A business. She turned to the woman sitting next to her. Sherry does office cleaning. Very humble work. I could feel my heart sink in my chest. The conversation turned back to vacations in the Hamptons and private school decisions topics that I couldn't join. I had nothing to offer these people. Nothing they would care to hear, at least. Then dessert arrived, and everything truly fell apart. Tommy had managed to sneak away from the kids' table and climbed into my lap. His face was covered in chocolate cake, and he beamed up at me. Grandma, will you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself? He asked, his voice full of excitement. It was our thing, our story. I had made it up years ago. A princess who didn't need rescuing because she was clever and strong. But before I could start, Lydia was standing up, her voice sharp and demanding. Tommy, get down from there right now, she snapped. You'll get your clothes dirty. Tommy clung to me, not understanding. But Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story. No, Tommy. Lydia grabbed him from my lap, roughly making him whimper. She turned to me, her face a mask of contempt. I think it's time for you to leave. The dining room fell into stunned silence. Every eye was on me. Lydia had made her move, and in that moment, the entire dinner turned into my personal humiliation. Lydia, please. I started, my voice barely above a whisper, but the words didn't matter. She was done with me. Security! She called out loudly, though there was no security guard present. Could you please escort this woman out? She's disturbing our family dinner. David finally stood up, his face ashen. Lydia, that's my mother. Your mother. Lydia spat her words like venom. She doesn't belong at a table with decent people. I stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. David just stared at the ground, his silence making it clear that he wasn't going to defend me. I didn't remember walking to the door, but somehow I found myself outside, the cold evening air biting at my skin. As I sat in my car shaking, I looked into the rearview mirror. I saw a 68-year-old woman, her silver hair slightly messy from Tommy's hug. I was wearing the nicest dress I owned, but somehow it felt like rags. Lydia's cruel words echoed in my mind. But what she didn't know, and what none of them knew, was that tomorrow I would walk into the gleaming headquarters of Meridian Technologies, take the elevator to the top floor, and sit behind the mahogany desk in the corner office. The company where Lydia worked as a marketing manager, believing she was climbing the corporate ladder with her sharp tongue and calculated cruelty. Tomorrow, she would learn the truth. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of calm determination that only comes after a deep realization. I'd spent the night reliving every moment of the dinner, the way Lydia humiliated me, the way David did, nothing the way I left without even a single word of defense from the people I loved most. I knew exactly what I had to do. The sun hadn't even risen when I got into my car and headed toward the office. The drive was strangely peaceful. The streets were quiet, the world still wrapped in that early morning calm. I wasn't nervous, not in the least. In fact, I was more resolved than I had been in years. I pulled up to Meridian Technologies about an hour before my usual time. The massive building towered over the city like a monument to everything I had worked for over the past 3 decades. I built this company from nothing, starting with just an idea. People laughed at me, a woman trying to start a tech company. But here it was, now thriving, employing over 2,000 people and leading in a competitive industry. And soon Lydia would realize that I was the one who held the real power. Miguel, the security guard, looked at me, a little surprised, when I entered the building so early. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison. You're here early today," he said, a bit startled, but polite. I smiled. "Couldn't sleep, Miguel," I said, my voice calm. I walked into the building with the same confidence I had for the past 35 years. The mahogany floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The quiet hum of the elevators making the place feel alive. The 42nd floor was where my office sat in the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a stunning view of the city below. It was my kingdom, my achievement. The world may have seen me as just another older woman, someone who didn't fit their ideal of success. But I knew the truth. Success isn't just about appearance or who you know. It's about what you build with your own two hands. And I had built this. This was mine. I went straight to my office. The computer was still on, showing the usual emails, the day's agenda, and the files I'd left open the night before. I could already hear the murmur of activity in the building, employees coming in for another day of work, probably unaware of what was going to happen next. I called Helen, my trusted executive assistant, who had been with me for years. She was 62, and like me, she was part of the backbone of this company, someone who had seen its growth and understood what hard work really meant. "Helen, I need you to pull the employee database for me," I said, my voice firm. "Get me everything on Lydia Mitchell." "Of course," Helen replied without hesitation, recognizing the urgency in my voice. It didn't take long before the files were on my desk, every detail of Lydia's employment with Meridian Technologies in front of me. I scrolled through the documents, her employee photo, smiling back at me, so full of confidence. The information about her hire, her role as marketing manager, and her salary were all there, but it was the performance reviews that caught my attention. 3 formal complaints, all filed against her by older employees. The first from Margaret Chen, 61, who had complained that Lydia publicly humiliated her in a budget meeting. The second from Robert Williams, 58, from IT support, who had reported that Lydia berated him for working too slowly, forcing him to do overtime on her personal projects. The third came from Janet Rodriguez, 63, who was moved to the night shift after Lydia's complaint about her not accommodating her schedule change. Each complaint was dismissed under the guise of Lydia maintaining high standards, but I could see through that. Lydia was targeting older employees. She saw them as weak, as less than her, and she used her position to push them out. It sickened me to think how long she had gotten away with this. Just as I was digesting this information, my phone rang. It was David. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "About last night, about Lydia. I want to apologize." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to hear the apology. I already knew the truth. "David, let me ask you something," I said calmly, interrupting him. "What do you know about Lydia's behavior at work?" There was a long silence. I could almost hear him trying to come up with an answer that wouldn't make him sound ignorant. "She's ambitious, Mom. She's building a career," he said slowly. "And do you know how she treats the older employees? How she publicly humiliates them, berates them for being outdated. How she made Janet Rodriguez work on the night shift after Lydia complained that she couldn't accommodate her schedule." I pressed. Another long silence. Then David's voice, low and disbelieving. "I didn't know that." "Of course you didn't," I said, softly, shaking my head. "Because she's been too good at playing the victim. She's been so clever about getting her way, but I'm not going to let her get away with it anymore." I don't understand, Mom. "Why are you doing this?" David asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm doing this because I've spent my entire life building this company with respect, with hard work, with honor," I said, my voice firm now. "And Lydia doesn't respect any of that. She doesn't understand what it means to work hard and treat people with dignity." I could hear him sigh deeply. "So what are you going to do?" "Let me worry about that," I said, ending the call. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The morning had slipped away, and soon enough, it was time. I looked at my watch. 9:45 a.m. Perfect. Lydia had no idea what was coming. She was still operating under the illusion that she was untouchable, that her sharp tongue and calculated cruelty would keep her in power. I walked to the elevator, the click of my heels echoing through the quiet corridor. As the elevator descended, I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. My silver hair was neatly styled, my dark blue dress sharp and professional. I was ready. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. My team was already at their desks, working as usual, but there was a buzz in the air. Everyone knew I had arrived early today. But what they didn't know was that today was going to be different. I stepped into my office where Lydia's file was waiting on my desk. Helen knocked gently before entering. "Mrs. Morrison, Lydia is on her way up," Helen said. "Good. Let's make sure she takes the main elevator," I replied. At exactly 10:00 a.m., Lydia arrived standing in front of my office door. She didn't know what hit her. Lydia hesitated at the door of my office, clearly taken aback by the opulence of the space. Her eyes widened slightly as she stepped inside, her sharp heels clicking loudly on the floor, giving her an air of confidence she didn't quite deserve. Her posture was perfect. Her suit tailored, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She was the picture of corporate success. But in that moment, I saw her for what she really was, a woman who had built her so-called success on the backs of others, stepping on everyone who didn't meet her standards. She stood just inside the door, her lips slightly parted, as if waiting for me to speak first. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Her voice laced with that fall sweetness she always used when she thought she could manipulate someone. "Sit down, Lydia," I said, my voice calm and steady, giving nothing away. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk, watching as she made her way to it, her eyes flicking around the room, likely trying to size me up. As she sat down, I leaned back in my chair and studied her. She was uncomfortable, there was no mistaking it. This was no longer her domain, she was on unfamiliar ground. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here." I began breaking the silence. "Well, there are a few things we need to discuss. Important things. Things you've been doing in this company that are far beyond just high standards." Her gaze sharpened at my words, but she quickly masked it with a confident smile. "What do you mean by that? I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Morrison. If you've heard anything about me, it's only because I'm doing my best to help this company succeed." "Oh, I've heard quite a bit about you, Lydia," I said, leaning forward, my eyes narrowing slightly. "But it's not the kind of success you're bragging about. You see, I've reviewed your employee file, and I've been hearing quite a bit from your co-workers. Margaret Chen, Robert Williams, Janet Rodriguez." Her smile faltered just for a second, but it was enough for me to catch it. Lydia wasn't as confident as she thought she was. She knew what I was getting at. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice suddenly losing its sharp edge, becoming defensive. "These are just misunderstandings, professional disagreements." "Misunderstandings," I repeated. "Let me remind you, Margaret Chen, 61 years old, was humiliated by you in front of the whole office. You called her outdated, suggested she step aside for someone who understood modern business. Robert Williams, 58 years old, had to stay late for you on personal projects, and when he couldn't keep up with your high standards, you berated him. And let's not forget Janet Rodriguez, 63 years old, who you got transferred to the night shift because she didn't adjust to your last-minute schedule changes. Do I need to go on?" Her eyes widened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear. She quickly masked it again, but it was too late. I had her cornered. "Those complaints were dismissed," she said quickly, almost as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. My supervisor understood. I was only trying to make the company more efficient. "Is that so?" I asked, tilting my head. "Efficient for who exactly? For people who work hard and contribute, or for you, Lydia, to climb to the top by knocking everyone else down?" I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I wanted her to feel this. I wanted her to understand the enormity of what she'd done. "Lydia," I continued, my tone soft but firm, "you're not as clever as you think you are. You've been playing a game thinking you could get away with treating people however you please because you're good at hiding behind your charm and your status. But I'm here to tell you that the game's over." Her face flushed, and I could see the anger building up in her hands tightening into fists. But she didn't speak. She was waiting for me to continue. You see, I went on, I've spent the last 35 years building this company based on principles of respect and dignity. I've built it on the idea that every person in this building has something valuable to contribute. But you've taken that and twisted it into something ugly. You've treated people like they were disposable, like their worth was tied to their age or their job title, and now you've come to the top of the ladder, but the rung you've climbed on is made of broken people. Lydia opened her mouth, likely to protest, but I held up my hand to stop her. You're right about one thing, Lydia, I said, staring her down. You do have a choice. You can keep playing the victim, keep blaming everyone else for your failures. Or you can take responsibility for what you've done, understand the consequences, and learn from it. But I'm not going to tolerate this kind of behavior in my company any longer. She shifted in her seat, her gaze darting around, clearly unsure of how to respond. Her mask of confidence was beginning to crack. So what happens now? She asked finally. Well, that depends on you, I said, folding my arms across my chest. You have two options. One, you can continue to work here, but you'll be demoted to a position that reflects your actions. You'll spend time working alongside those you've so callously dismissed, people like Janet and Robert, who have given their all to this company. You'll learn what it means to respect those who are often overlooked. Or you can resign. I'll give you a neutral reference, but your reputation will follow you wherever you go. I saw the internal struggle on her face. She was trying to hold on to her pride, but I could see the reality of the situation dawning on her. Are you blackmailing me? Lydia's voice trembled slightly as she spoke the words. No, Lydia, I said, standing up and walking toward the window. I'm offering you a chance to make things right. You can either learn from this or continue to spiral. But I won't let you continue to damage this company or its people. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't do this. You can't treat me like this. I'll make sure you regret this. I turned back to face her, my expression calm but resolute. I already regret one thing, Lydia. I regret not addressing this sooner. But now the choice is yours. I didn't wait for her response. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the floor, signaling that our conversation was over. Lydia stood frozen for a moment, and then, with one final furious look at me, she stormed out of the office. Lydia's departure from my office was the beginning of the end for her at Meridian Technologies. The sound of her angry footsteps echoed through the hallway, the tension hanging in the air long after she was gone. I remained standing by the window, staring out over the city. The morning sun reflected off the glass buildings below, casting long shadows across the streets. But in my mind, I was still back in that room with Lydia, watching her pride crack and crumble. It had been a long time since I'd made a decision that was so personal, so directly tied to the actions of one individual. But Lydia had crossed a line. She thought she could manipulate and humiliate those beneath her without consequence. She didn't realize who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some elderly woman to be dismissed. I was the woman who built this company from the ground up, and I would be damned if I let her drag it down with her toxic attitude. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and email chains that demanded my attention. But even as I answered questions and signed documents, my mind kept drifting back to Lydia, to her smug smile, and to her complete lack of empathy for anyone but herself. It was as though she was incapable of seeing the value in anyone who wasn't as successful as she believed herself to be. As the workday wound down, I sat in my office, reviewing some final reports for the quarter. The door to my office opened softly, and Helen entered, her expression unreadable as always. Mrs. Morrison, the report on Lydia's demotion has been finalized, she said, placing a stack of papers on my desk. I've also updated her file. The email regarding her new assignment in food services has already been sent to HR, and her immediate supervisor has been briefed on the situation. Good, I replied, not looking up from the papers. It's done then. I want this handled quickly. She needs to understand that no one is above accountability here. Not even her. Helen nodded. I also received a call from Marcus earlier. He wants to meet with you. He sounded upset. I sighed, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Marcus. I had expected this. I knew he would be caught in the middle of the fallout. I'd hoped he would understand why I had to do this, but something told me that his loyalty to Lydia would cloud his judgment. Give me a moment, Helen, I said, raising a hand as she started to leave. Did you send the updated reports to the board members yet? Yes, they've all been sent, and I've received confirmation of receipt from every member. Perfect, thank you. Helen left the room, and I sat back in my chair, my fingers tapping lightly on the desk. I knew Marcus would want to know more about what had transpired with Lydia, and I wasn't looking forward to the conversation. He was my son. I loved him. But he had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. He didn't like it when people were upset with each other, especially when it came to family. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, waiting as it rang. When he finally answered, his voice was tight, a mixture of frustration and concern. Mom, we need to talk, he said. I'm worried about Lydia. She's really been struggling lately, and now you've made things so much worse. She told me what happened, and I think you've gone too far. Marcus, you're misunderstanding, I said, my voice calm but firm. I didn't go too far. What I did was necessary. Lydia's actions were harmful, not just to the people in this company, but to the reputation of Meridian Technologies. I couldn't let that go on any longer. He was silent for a moment, and I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. I understand that, Mom. But you know how she can be. She's not handling things well. She's blaming you for everything. She thinks you're attacking her. I'm not attacking anyone, Marcus. I'm holding her accountable for her actions. If she wants to blame me, then let her. But I'm not going to sit by and let her destroy the culture of this company because of her personal insecurities. Another long pause on the phone. I don't know, Mom. I don't know if this is the right approach. Maybe there was a better way to handle it. There was no better way, Marcus, I replied. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing, and Lydia needs to understand that. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. She can either take responsibility for her behavior or she can leave. The choice is hers. I'll talk to her, Marcus said, finally, his voice softer now. I don't want to choose between the two of you, but I also don't want you to keep fighting. There's no fight, Marcus, I said, my voice steady. I'm not fighting with her. I'm protecting the company and the people who work here, and if that means making difficult decisions, then so be it. I could tell that Marcus was still unsure, still caught between loyalty to his wife and understanding the need for change. But I knew this was something I had to do. If I didn't stand firm now, I would lose everything I had worked so hard for. And so would everyone else. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of quiet resolve wash over me. This was the right decision. No matter how difficult it might be for Marcus to understand right now, he would eventually see that I had acted out of necessity. The next morning, I arrived at work early as usual. The city outside was waking up slowly, the streets empty except for a few early risers. As I walked through the office, I could feel the weight of Lydia's absence. It was almost as if the air had shifted lighter, cleaner somehow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Lydia would fight back. She wouldn't go down without a fight, and I needed to be prepared for what was coming. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the culture of the company, about the people I'd built this business for. It was about protecting the legacy I had spent my life creating. The days that followed Lydia's demotion were nothing short of tense. As expected, she was not taking the change well. I knew she would lash out, but I didn't realize just how far she was willing to go to make me regret my decision. Word quickly spread throughout the company about her reassignment to the kitchen. Some employees found the situation almost comical, while others, particularly those who had experienced Lydia's abrasiveness firsthand, found a quiet sense of satisfaction. But for me, this wasn't about satisfying anyone. This was about maintaining the integrity of Meridian Technologies, a company that had always stood for innovation and respect, values that Lydia's behavior had undermined. Yet, as the days wore on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision I'd made. The guilt lingered, but it wasn't guilt about Lydia's treatment. It was the nagging realization that I might have just lost my son. By Friday afternoon, Marcus had stopped by my office again. He didn't call ahead, didn't ask for an appointment, just walked straight into the room, as if he had every right to. He was wearing the same strained look he'd had on the phone a few days earlier. His eyes were puffy, his jaw clenched tight, but there was an air of something else. Something I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. I sighed and gestured toward the chair opposite my desk. "Take a seat. What's on your mind?" Marcus lowered himself into the chair, his hands folding nervously in his lap. For a moment he was silent, just staring at the desk, as though he was trying to work through his thoughts. I remained still, watching him, knowing what was coming, but not quite ready to hear it. "I don't know how to do this," he finally muttered. "I've tried to see it from your point of view, Mom, but it's not that simple. I don't know how to reconcile this with the person I thought you were."
I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. He didn't.
"Marcus, I've told you before, this was necessary. Lydia was toxic for this company. She treated people with no respect, and she thought that because of her position, she could get away with it. I couldn't allow that to happen any longer." His face softened for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand. But then the walls went up again. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Maybe you're right about Lydia. Maybe she did things that weren't right. But you've taken it too far. You've humiliated her in front of the entire company. You've turned her into a joke. And frankly, I don't know how to feel about it. I can't stand by and watch you do this." I stood up from my desk, my palms flat against the wood, feeling the tension between us build with each word. "Marcus, you don't understand. She humiliated herself long before I did anything to her. I simply gave her what she deserved. She's made it clear that she doesn't care about anyone but herself. She's belittled people in this company, people who have worked hard and sacrificed for years, and you want me to feel sorry for her?" His eyes flickered with frustration. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I just think there's a better way. We're family, Mom. You're doing this to her, yes, but what's it doing to us? What's it doing to Tommy?" Tommy. The mention of my grandson hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent my entire life protecting my family, working hard to ensure they had everything they needed. I never wanted my son to feel caught between his mother and his wife. But here we were, and the damage felt irreversible. "I never wanted Tommy to be affected by this," I said, my voice softening. "But we all have to learn that actions have consequences, Marcus. And I don't regret what I did." Marcus let out a breath, his gaze falling to the floor. "You don't regret it. But do you really think Lydia is the only one who's been wrong here? What about me? What about the way this is affecting my family? You're asking me to pick sides. Mom, I don't want to do that." I paused, my hands falling to my sides. This wasn't the conversation I had hoped for. I had hoped Marcus would understand the reasoning behind my actions, not feel as if he were caught in some war between his mother and his wife. But I could see it in his eyes now. The confusion, the hurt, the helplessness. He didn't know how to handle this, and I didn't know how to make it easier for him. You don't have to pick sides, Marcus. This isn't about me versus Lydia. This is about doing what's right for the company, and sometimes doing what's right means making tough choices. I explained, my voice more measured now. He looked up, the anger in his eyes slowly giving way to exhaustion. I'm tired, Mom. Tired of all the fighting, all the tension. It's not just you and Lydia, it's everything. It's the way she treats you, the way she's manipulated me. I don't know what to believe anymore. I stepped toward him, my heart aching for him. I know, darling. I know it's hard. But sometimes we have to make decisions that aren't easy. I've worked hard my entire life to build something here, Marcus. And I won't let anyone tear it down. I get that, he said quietly, standing up. But I don't know how to get past this. I don't know if I can just accept what you've done. Then we'll figure it out, I said softly. I'm your mother, Marcus. I'll always be here for you. But you need to understand why I did this. And if you don't agree with me, that's okay. But this is my company, and I'm going to protect it. As he turned to leave, I felt the weight of his words press down on me. He wasn't ready to accept what had happened. He wasn't ready to see things my way, and maybe he never would be. The next few days passed in a blur. I received a formal resignation from Lydia, effective immediately. It was exactly what I had expected, and honestly, it felt anticlimactic. She had made her choice. She would leave, but not without leaving behind a trail of destruction. I wasn't surprised, but I couldn't help but feel the sting of disappointment. She had so much potential, and yet she had squandered it all by focusing on climbing over others rather than building herself up. But it was time to move forward. Meridian Technologies would survive. I had worked too hard for it to fail now. I would rebuild the company culture, make sure the right people were in positions of power, and ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. And then there was Marcus. He still wasn't talking to me, still wasn't speaking to me the way he used to. It was as if a wall had been built between us, one that I wasn't sure how to break down. But for the first time, I knew that this wasn't just about me. This was about him finding his way too. For now, I had to let go. I had to trust that Marcus would come to understand, even if it took time. Meridian Technologies was my legacy, but my family was my heart. The days after Lydia's resignation felt like walking through a fog. There were meetings, decisions, and a constant influx of emails, but none of it seemed to matter as much as the silence that lingered in the spaces between my thoughts. My company, the one I had built from nothing, was still moving forward. The employees were still clocking in and out. But I knew that something crucial was missing. For years, I had been a leader. I had fought tooth and nail to get to where I was, and every decision, every choice had been made with the future of Meridian Technologies in mind. But now, it felt like something had shifted. The balance I had once found between my personal life and my work was crumbling, and I couldn't tell if it was because of Lydia's departure or because of my relationship with Marcus. That Friday morning, I woke up early as usual, my mind swirling with thoughts of the company's next steps. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. There was a meeting with the board at 10 o'clock, and I needed to be prepared. But despite the looming responsibilities, there was one thing I had learned from all of this. I couldn't keep pretending like nothing had changed. When I walked into my office, the first thing I noticed was the stack of paperwork on my desk. It was the same as always: financial reports, project proposals, employee evaluations. But instead of feeling empowered as I usually did, I felt a sense of dread. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened with Lydia and how the entire situation had affected the people around me. The ones who didn't have a choice but to bear the consequences of her actions, and the ones who had their lives completely upended. I picked up the phone and dialed Helen, my assistant. She had been with me for years, and I knew that no matter what happened, she would always have my back.
Helen, I need you to do something for me, I said, trying to steady my voice. I want to meet with Janet Rodriguez, Robert Williams, and Margaret Chen today. Can you schedule it for me?
Helen didn't hesitate. Of course, Mrs. Morrison. I'll set it up. After the call, I sat back in my chair and looked out the window, watching as the city below seemed to move in a constant, unrelenting rhythm. People going about their day working, living unaware of the internal turmoil I was experiencing. I had spent so many years building this company, trying to create something that mattered. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten the people who had helped me get there. Lydia was only a small part of the problem. The real issue was how I had allowed myself to become so absorbed in my role that I had neglected to truly see the people around me. I had become so focused on the business, on the growth, on the bottom line, that I had lost sight of what truly made this company special. The people who worked here, who believed in the same values I did. An hour later, I was sitting in the conference room with Janet, Robert, and Margaret. We had worked together for years, and they had all been impacted by the toxic environment Lydia had helped foster. They knew what it was like to work under someone who thought their position gave them the right to belittle others. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice more sincere than it had been in a long time. I know things have been difficult around here, and I want to start by apologizing. I've let things get out of hand, and I've failed to protect all of you in the way that I should have. Janet, the floor supervisor, who had been unfairly moved to the night shift because of Lydia's complaints, was the first to speak. It's not your fault, Mrs. Morrison, she said, her voice strong despite the years of mistreatment. But we've all seen the changes. The way the atmosphere has shifted, especially since Lydia started targeting those of us who've been here longer. Robert, the IT support manager, nodded. I agree. It's been hard, but I think it's time for some real changes. We can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not. Margaret, who had been with the company since its early days, added, I know you're doing your best, Mrs. Morrison. But it feels like the heart of the company has been lost. We need a return to the values you built this place on. I sat there listening to them and realized just how much they were right. I had become so focused on moving forward, on growing the company, that I had overlooked the foundation of trust and respect that had been so integral to its success. Meridian Technologies had never been about cutting corners or pushing people aside. It had always been about innovation, but also about integrity. I hear you, I said, finally, my voice quieter now. I've let things get out of control, but we're going to fix it. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. We'll have new training, a new way of handling complaints, and we're going to restructure the way things are done here. The old ways won't work anymore. The three of them nodded in agreement. I could see that they were relieved, but I also knew it wasn't enough. Trust had been broken, and it was going to take more than a few changes to repair it. The rest of the afternoon was spent discussing the specifics, new training programs, revising the employee handbook, and addressing the lingering issues caused by Lydia's toxic leadership. It was a lot of work, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming the company's integrity. By the time the meeting ended, the weight in my chest had lightened, but only slightly. I had made the decision to fix what had gone wrong, but I knew that fixing the damage Lydia had caused wasn't going to be as easy as making a few adjustments. I had to prove to my employees that I was still the leader they could rely on, someone who valued their contributions and respected their worth. As I left the conference room, I caught a glimpse of Marcus standing in the hallway, looking down at his phone. He looked up when he saw me, his expression unreadable. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. "Marcus," I said softly, "we need to talk." His face tightened, and for a moment I thought he might walk away. But instead, he nodded and stepped toward me. "Yeah, we do." We stood there for a few seconds, the silence stretching between us. I knew the conversation wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it.
"I need you to understand something." I began, my voice steady now. "This isn't about me being right or wrong. It's about the people who work for me and the people I love. I've made mistakes, Marcus, but I'm trying to fix them."
"I know, Mom," he replied quietly. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I didn't know what Lydia had really done. "I should have told you," I admitted. "I should have shown you the truth sooner, but I've been so focused on everything else, I lost sight of the most important thing." Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes softening as he looked at me. "I get it, Mom. I understand. And I'm sorry too. I should have been more supportive." For the first time in a long time, I felt the distance between us begin to close. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew we could rebuild what had been broken. Not just the company, but our family too. The days following my conversation with Marcus were full of change, both at work and at home. I began to sense a shift in the atmosphere at Meridian Technologies. The employees, particularly the older staff members who had been so mistreated by Lydia, seemed to breathe easier now that I had acknowledged their struggles. There was a renewed sense of respect in the office, though it was clear that trust had to be earned back over time. But the most significant change for me wasn't the restructuring of the company or the policies I was putting into place. It was the way I started to see myself again. For so long, I had defined myself through my work. Meridian Technologies was my legacy, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten the human element of it. I had become consumed by success, forgetting the very things that had made the company great in the first place: integrity, respect, and care for the people who made it all happen. It wasn't until I started making things right with my employees that I realized I also needed to make things right at home. My relationship with Marcus had been strained for years, and despite his attempts to show understanding, I knew it would take more than words to rebuild our bond. It was an ordinary Thursday morning when Marcus and I met for lunch. I had spent the morning reviewing the progress of our new employee training program, which was being well received by the team. We had implemented a leadership program designed to address issues of respect, communication, and empathy. And though it was still in its infancy, it felt like we were on the right path. As I walked to the small cafe near the office, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in the past few months. When I arrived, Marcus was already seated at a table near the window. His shoulders seemed less tense, his expression less guarded than it had been the last time we spoke. I took a seat across from him, and we exchanged a brief smile before I began speaking. "Marcus, I've been thinking about everything about the company, about Lydia, and about us." I began, my voice steady but sincere. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've let a lot of things slip through the cracks. But I'm doing what I can to make things right." "I know," Mom Marcus replied, looking at me with a mixture of concern and something else, perhaps relief. "I can see that you're trying, and I appreciate that, but I think we both need to understand that fixing things will take time." "I'm not expecting miracles," I said, offering a small smile. "But I don't want to go through this process alone. I need you, Marcus. I need you to help me. I need to be a mother again, not just a CEO." Marcus's eyes softened. He had always been the caring, compassionate son I raised him to be, but somewhere along the way, I had pushed him to the sidelines. He had seen me as a powerful woman, but perhaps he had forgotten that underneath all the success, I was still his mother, a woman who had sacrificed much to give him the life he had. "I'm here, Mom," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "and I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. I was so focused on trying to live up to expectations that I forgot what was really important. I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him, a wave of emotion washing over me. "We're both guilty of that," I whispered. "But it's not too late. We can still fix this." The rest of our lunch was filled with small talk, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. We were no longer just a mother and son separated by years of misunderstanding and hurt. We were beginning to rebuild piece by piece. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Janet Rodriguez, the custodial supervisor who had been so badly mistreated by Lydia. She had been with the company for over 20 years, and her work ethic had never been in question. She had always been reliable, hardworking, and incredibly patient, even when others like Lydia treated her like she was invisible. I picked up the phone, surprised to see her name on the screen. "Hello, Janet," I greeted her warmly. "How's everything going?"
"Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice steady, but with a touch of gratitude. "I just wanted to call and thank you for everything you've done. The new training program is already making a difference, and I can see the changes in the way people are treating each other."
I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I'm glad to hear that, Janet. But this isn't just about the company. It's about respect, and I want to make sure you all feel valued."
"Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time. "It means a lot. But there's something else I wanted to say. I know you've been dealing with a lot, but I want you to know that we've got your back. We're in this together." Her words struck me deeply. Here was a woman who had been at the bottom of the corporate ladder, enduring years of mistreatment, yet she was the one offering me support. She was the one showing me that the heart of Meridian Technologies wasn't in the boardroom or the corporate strategies. It was in the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make it all work. "Thank you, Janet," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." As I hung up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had a long way to go, but I was no longer walking this journey alone. I had my employees, my family, and myself reclaiming what I had lost along the way. That evening, as I returned home, I sat in my favorite chair by the window and looked out over the city. The view had always been one of my favorite things about the apartment, and tonight it felt particularly meaningful. I had spent so much time focusing on the bigger picture, on the future of the company, that I had forgotten to appreciate the small moments, the ones that mattered most. The phone rang again, and I picked it up, expecting another business-related call. Instead, it was Marcus. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice light. "Tommy wanted to tell you something." I smiled. "Put him on." The sound of my grandson's excited voice filled my ears. "Grandma, I finished building the biggest castle in the sandbox today. You have to come see it." I chuckled, feeling my heart swell. "I'll be there soon, sweetheart. I can't wait to see it." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had my family, my company, and a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. The week that followed was a turning point for me in ways I hadn't expected. At work, the energy felt different, lighter somehow, as though the weight of the past was beginning to lift. The changes I had implemented, the training, the new focus on empathy and respect were already starting to take root. People seemed more willing to speak up, to share ideas, to help each other in ways they hadn't before. But as gratifying as that was, there was still something missing. A deeper connection that I knew I needed to rebuild, especially with Marcus. That afternoon, after another productive meeting with HR, I decided to take a step I had been putting off for months. I called Marcus. We hadn't spent much time together since our lunch the week before, and I wanted to make sure we kept the momentum going. I wasn't expecting a grand reconciliation overnight, but I did want to make sure we were headed in the right direction. "Hey, Mom." Marcus answered on the second ring. His voice sounded lighter than it had in a long time. "What's up?"
I was thinking we could spend some time together this weekend, I said, keeping my tone casual but sincere. Maybe take Tommy out for a day in the park. I haven't had much time with him lately. I'd like that, Marcus said quickly. Tommy's been asking about you nonstop. He really wants to show you the new park he's discovered. It's just down the street from us. Perfect, I said with a smile. Let's make it happen then. The rest of the week seemed to fly by, each day marked by little successes at work and quiet moments at home. I spent the evening sorting through company feedback, making sure that the restructuring was going smoothly. I spent the mornings with my employees, checking in with them personally to see how they were adjusting to the new culture we were building. By Friday, I was ready to take the next step in mending my relationship with Marcus. I was aware that there were still unresolved feelings, things that had been left unsaid for far too long. But I was also conscious of the fact that no matter how much time passed, we couldn't move forward unless we both committed to change. That Saturday morning, I picked up Tommy and Marcus at their home. Tommy was brimming with excitement as expected. He had his small backpack slung over one shoulder, and his wide grin was enough to make anyone's heart melt. "Grandma, I found the perfect spot for us," Tommy announced as soon as he climbed into the car. "You did, huh?" I asked, laughing as I adjusted the rearview mirror. "What's so special about this spot? It's by the big fountain," he exclaimed. "We can sit there and I can tell you all about my new secret club." "A secret club?" Marcus teased from the front seat. "I'm not sure I'm allowed to know about it, huh?" Tommy giggled and shook his head. "Nope, only for special people." I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, everything felt like it was in its right place. As I drove, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The difficulties at work, the tensions with Marcus, the struggles with Lydia, those things didn't disappear, but in that moment, they felt manageable. Life had a way of throwing challenges your way, but it also had a way of giving you the tools to rise above them. We arrived at the park just before noon, and Tommy wasted no time in dragging us toward the fountain he had described so eagerly. It was a beautiful spot with a large stone fountain surrounded by blooming flowers and shaded benches. The air was warm, and the sun sparkled off the water, creating little rainbows in the mist. We sat down together, and Tommy immediately began his story about his secret club. I listened intently, laughing at the silly names he gave to his members, and marveling at how much joy he took in something so simple. Marcus sat beside me, his eyes softening as he watched our grandson. "It's funny," Marcus said, after a while, his voice low, "how something like this can make everything else fade into the background. I've been so caught up in everything, the business, Lydia, all the mess, and I forgot how important it is to just be present." I nodded, looking out at the water. "I know what you mean. I spent so many years chasing success that I didn't even notice when the important things started slipping away. But I'm trying to fix that now." "We both are," Marcus added, his voice sincere. "I've been trying to be a better dad to Tommy, a better son to you. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm ready to make things right." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, and I know you'll keep getting better. We all will." Tommy, who had been contentedly drawing circles in the sand, suddenly looked up. "Grandma," he said, his voice small but serious, "can we build a big castle together? You said you'd teach me how." I smiled warmly at him. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's make the biggest, best castle ever." For the next few hours, we worked together, Marcus helping Tommy gather sand, while I carefully shaped the walls and turrets. It was a small thing, but in that moment it felt like everything we needed. A little time, a little attention, and a lot of love. As the castle took shape, so did something else inside me, a new sense of hope. By the time we left the park, the tension that had marked so many of our previous conversations had started to dissolve. Marcus and I talked openly about the future, about what we both wanted and about how we could support each other moving forward. We agreed to make more time for family to make sure that we didn't lose sight of the things that mattered most. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. There was still much to be done, both at work and in my personal life. But for the first time, I believed that I was on the right path. I was rebuilding not just my company, but my family, one step at a time. A few weeks had passed since that day in the park, and life seemed to be unfolding in ways I hadn't expected. At work, things had stabilized. The changes I'd put into place, more respect for the employees, sensitivity training, and the shift toward empathy and community, had already made a profound difference in the culture of Meridian Technologies. The company felt less like a cold corporate machine and more like a thriving family of talented individuals who were treated with respect. And as gratifying as that was, it wasn't the only thing that had shifted. Marcus and I had been working on rebuilding our relationship. And although it wasn't always easy, I was beginning to feel like the pieces were falling back into place. We met for lunch regularly, taking the time to talk about what had happened, what we wanted for the future, and how to move forward. It wasn't perfect. There were still a lot of old wounds, but the foundation was solid, and for that I was thankful. That week, something unusual happened at work. One of the older employees, Janet Rodriguez, the one who had been shifted to the night shift after Saria's complaints, came to my office for a private meeting. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I could tell she was holding something in. Janet had been with the company for years, but she was always quiet, humble, and never one to complain. But she had earned her right to be heard now. "Mrs. Morrison," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to thank you for everything." I sat back in my chair, surprised. "Thank you for what, Janet?" "For standing up for us," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I know I was transferred to the night shift because of Saria's complaints, but since you made the changes, everything has been better. The atmosphere has changed. People are more willing to help each other out. And it feels like we matter again." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "I'm just doing what should have been done a long time ago. You've been here working hard for years, Janet. You deserve to be treated with respect." Her smile was tentative at first, but then it grew. "Well, that's why I'm here. I've been given an opportunity to apply for a new position, floor supervisor. It's a promotion that I wasn't sure I could get before, but now I'm being considered." "Janet, that's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for her. "You've earned it. I hope you get the position. You deserve to be in a place where your experience is valued." She nodded, clearly moved by the support. "I just wanted to thank you, Mrs. Morrison. I never thought I'd be given a chance to rise like this." "You've earned it, Janet," I said firmly. "Don't ever doubt your worth. This company wouldn't run without people like you." As she left my office, I sat there for a long while reflecting on the power of one simple act of kindness. Standing up for someone like Janet, someone who had been ignored for too long, had created an opportunity for her to finally be seen. It was a reminder that change, no matter how small, could lead to something significant. Meanwhile, at home, things were slowly falling into place as well. Marcus and I had agreed to take Tommy out for a weekend camping trip. We had planned it for weeks, but it had never seemed like the right time. Now, with our relationship improving, we finally had the chance to take a break and do something simple but meaningful. On the day of the trip, Tommy was bouncing off the walls with excitement. I could barely keep up with his energy as we packed the car. Marcus had always been the planner, the one who organized everything. But today, he was letting me take the lead. It felt good to be able to contribute in a way that didn't involve work or dealing with family drama. This was about us, our small family, and making memories. "Are we there yet?" Tommy asked, peering through the back window of the car, his face pressed up against the glass. "We're getting close, buddy," Marcus said, trying to hold back a laugh. "Just a little while longer." I turned to look at Marcus and smiled. "We've got a lot of good memories ahead of us, don't we?" "We sure do," he replied, his voice full of sincerity. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how much time I've wasted and how much I want to make up for." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "It's not too late. We can make the most of every day from now on." By the time we arrived at the campsite, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the landscape. Tommy immediately ran off to explore the area, his excitement bubbling over. Marcus and I followed more slowly, taking our time to set up the tent and prepare a small campfire. As we sat around the fire roasting marshmallows and watching the flames flicker in the cool evening air, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weighed down by the past. I wasn't thinking about work, about Saraya, or about the endless challenges I'd faced. Instead, I was here present, in the moment, with my son and grandson, surrounded by the beauty of nature. Tommy crawled into my lap, his little hands sticky from the marshmallows, and looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, when can we do this again?" I laughed, pulling him closer. "We'll do it as many times as you want, sweetheart. Whenever you need a break from the world, just come to Grandma." "That's a promise?" he asked, his voice serious. I nodded. "That's a promise." It was then that I realized, no matter what had happened in the past, I still had the power to make a difference. Not just at work, but in my personal life as well. The past had tried to break me, but it hadn't succeeded. Now I was stronger. I had learned to embrace the importance of family, the value of hard work, and the strength that comes from standing up for what is right. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above us, I knew that the journey I had started was far from over. It was just beginning. And with every step, I would continue to make my own way with the people who mattered most by my side. The weeks after our camping trip passed in a blur of routine, but there was an undeniable shift in our family dynamics. Marcus and I had begun to rebuild not just our relationship, but also our understanding of what it meant to be a family. The walls between us were slowly coming down. The anger, frustration, and guilt that had poisoned our conversations had been replaced by open communication and shared moments of joy. I could see a change in Marcus. He seemed lighter, more present, more connected to what mattered. I spent the next few months working tirelessly at Meridian Technologies, making sure that the company continued to grow. There were still challenges to face, but I now had a team that supported one another and valued the culture of respect and kindness I had worked hard to establish. I had learned something incredibly important from Saraya's downfall. Sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who teach us the most. In Saraya's case, her cruelty had forced me to take a hard look at myself and the company I had built. It had made me realize just how important it was to maintain integrity in every aspect of life. Then one morning, Helen, my ever-reliable assistant, called me into her office with news that stopped me in my tracks. "Mrs. Morrison, we just received a call from Janet Rodriguez," she said, her voice laced with excitement. "She got the promotion. They've made her the new floor supervisor. It's official now." A rush of pride filled me. Janet had been with the company for over 2 decades. Her dedication, resilience, and quiet strength had finally been recognized. She had worked so hard for this, and seeing her rise to the position she deserved was a reminder of why I fought for a better company culture. "That's fantastic news, Helen. Please send my congratulations to Janet," I said, trying to hide the emotion that welled up inside me. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison," Helen replied. "Also, there's something else you might want to hear. We just got word that Saraya Mitchell Morrison has submitted her resignation from Meridian Technologies." I paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the news to sink in. It didn't surprise me, but it still stung a little.
Saraya had always been so certain of her place in the world. She had built her entire life on the idea of power control and social status. Now, after everything that had happened, she was walking away from it all.
I see, I said, leaning back in my chair. Let's make sure HR processes that smoothly. We don't need any drama or backlash. As much as I wanted to feel vindicated, I realized something. I wasn't happy that Zaria had failed. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. In truth, I was sad for her. She had lost so much: her marriage, her career, and most of all, her chance to learn and grow. She had never understood the power of empathy, of humility, or of treating others with dignity. And now she had nothing left but the consequences of her actions. That evening, I received a call from Marcus. His voice was softer than it had been in the past, more vulnerable.
"Mom, I've been thinking," he began, and I could tell he was nervous. "Zaria, she's been talking about leaving. She's going to move back to her parents' place."
I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I understand. It's probably the best thing for her. She's really struggling," he added. "She doesn't want to admit it, but she's just not the same. She's blaming me for everything." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "Marcus, you have to remember that people only change when they want to. Saraya made her choices, and now she's facing the consequences. That's not something you can fix for her."
"I know," he said quietly. "I just want things to be different. I want us to be a family again." "We are a family," I said gently. "It's just that sometimes we have to let go of the people who don't know how to love us back, and that's okay. You'll be okay. We'll be okay." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could feel Marcus processing everything. Finally, he spoke again, his voice steadier this time. "Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've been holding on to the idea of who Zaraya was, not who she is now." I smiled to myself. "And that's okay too. It's just part of growing up." We ended the call on a positive note, and I felt a sense of relief. Marcus was beginning to see things for what they were. The weight of guilt and the obligation to protect Zaraya was starting to lift. It was a hard lesson, but it was one that needed to be learned. Sometimes we have to choose the difficult path of letting go in order to heal. The following weeks were filled with more reflection. I spent a lot of time with Tommy, showing him how to bake cookies and helping him with his school projects. It was in these small moments, these simple pleasures, that I realized what really mattered in life. Family, love, the ability to find joy in the little things, even in the face of all the adversity life had thrown at me. I continued to make changes at Meridian Technologies, working alongside my team to ensure that the company's new culture of respect and inclusivity was here to stay. We brought in new people, promoted the right individuals, and made sure that everyone, regardless of their role or age, felt valued. And as time passed, I noticed that the company itself seemed to be thriving. The employees were happier, the work was more meaningful, and our profits were up. It felt like we were building something stronger than just a business. We were creating a community, a family, and that was more powerful than anything. But there was still one thing left that I needed to do. It was time for me to step away from the day-to-day operations of the company. I had spent 35 years building Meridian Technologies into the success it was today. But now it was time to hand over the reins to someone who could take it even further. I called a meeting with my senior leadership team and let them know my decision. There were tears, applause, and a sense of excitement in the room. They had all seen the way the company had transformed, and they were eager to continue the journey. I knew that it was in good hands. As I walked out of that meeting, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had made a difference. Not just in my company, but in my own life and in the lives of those I loved. I spent the next few months traveling, exploring new opportunities, and enjoying the freedom that came with having built something I could be proud of. Tommy continued to ask me about dragons and princesses, and
I continued to tell him stories, knowing that those moments would stay with him forever. And as for Saria, well, I knew she would find her way just as I had. She had to. After all, life was about choices. And she would learn that sooner or later. As the sun set on my final day at Meridian Technologies, I smiled. The journey had been long and the lessons had been hard. But in the end, I had found something far more valuable than power or success. I had found my peace.